"Don't make a sound," Grace's trembling voice hissed in Naomi's ear, her hand clamped firmly across the maid's mouth. Naomi's eyes widened, her pulse hammering as she stumbled, nearly dropping the bundle of folded linens she carried. The crisp white sheets slid to the polished marble floor in a heap, the sound sharp against the silence of the long hallway. Naomi tried to pull away to cry out, but Grace's grip was iron, her fingers digging into her cheeks. When Grace finally released her, Naomi staggered back, rubbing her jaw where the pressure had left her skin tingling. She opened her mouth to demand an explanation, but Grace's pale hand shot out again, seizing her wrist, the urgency in her touch silencing Naomi more effectively than words. "You can't let him know you're here," Grace whispered, her eyes darting toward the heavy oak-paneled study door just a few steps away. Confusion clouded Naomi's face. She was only there to deliver the fresh sheets, to slip in and out unseen like always. For 2 years she had perfected the art of invisibility within the Whitmore estate. It was safer that way. She had learned early on that silence protected her. The fewer words spoken, the fewer ways her presence could be twisted against her. But the voice that thundered from behind the study door froze her blood. "James Whitmore. She'll never see a dime if she leaves me. I'll bury her reputation. I'll bury her future. Without me she is nothing. Absolutely nothing." Naomi's breath caught. She had known James was cruel, everyone who worked in the mansion knew. The way he barked orders at staff, the cold dismissal in his eyes when they answered, the subtle threats that lingered in his tone whenever something wasn't perfect. But hearing him speak of his wife like that, his own wife, made Naomi's chest ache with dread. She turned to Grace, expecting denial, maybe even anger, but instead she saw only confirmation. Grace's face was pale, her lips pressed so tightly together they looked bloodless, her entire body trembling like glass about to shatter. "You need to hear this," Grace whispered, her voice frayed at the edges. "Because one day the truth might save me. Or it might save you." Naomi blinked at her, confusion knitting her brows. "Save her? Save me?" She wanted to ask what that meant, but James's voice boomed again, slicing through her thoughts like a blade. "If she tries to embarrass me, I'll make sure the world sees her as unstable, hysterical, unfit. They'll believe me like they always do. Because power is truth." Naomi's stomach tightened. She had always known the balance of power in this house, in this country, leaned heavily against women like her. Black women were invisible until they were in the crosshairs, and then every whisper about them became a weapon. James knew it too. That smug certainty in his voice wasn't just arrogance, it was experience. Grace's hand trembled as it gripped Naomi's arm tighter. The sharpness of her nails pressed into Naomi's skin. Naomi looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a woman trapped in luxury but a woman living in terror. And in that moment, Naomi realized that this wasn't about sheets or chores anymore. She had stumbled into something she could never unhear. The chandelier above flickered, casting shifting shadows across the golden wallpaper. Naomi's heart raced. She wanted to retreat back to the laundry room, back to the safety of bleach and starch, where her only concern was whether a shirt collar lay flat. But Grace's grip anchored her to the spot. Naomi whispered, her voice fragile, "Why me? Why drag me into this?" Grace's eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. "Because I can't do this alone anymore. And you're the only one I can trust." Naomi almost laughed, bitter and soft. The only one? She was the maid. She was the woman who mopped the floors Grace's shoes walked on, who scrubbed the crystal goblets James raised in toast at dinner parties. Yet Grace clung to her as if she were a lifeline. James's voice cut through the moment, colder now. "And if she crosses me, I'll end it myself. Quietly. Permanently. No one will ever know." Naomi's chest seized. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her uniform. Grace went still beside her, her hand tightening painfully around Naomi's wrist. The silence after those words stretched like a taut rope, and Naomi could almost hear the weight of them pressing against the gilded walls. She wanted to run. She wanted to pretend she hadn't heard. But deep inside something shifted. She knew now that she was standing in a battlefield disguised as a mansion, and silence was no longer a shield. Her voice quivered as she asked, "What do you want me to do?" Grace's lips trembled before she formed the words. "Help me bring him down." Naomi's knees weakened, her world tilting under the gravity of that request. She was no savior. She was a maid, a shadow, a nobody in the eyes of the man who controlled everything. And yet, Grace's eyes, pleading, broken, desperate, said otherwise. Before Naomi could respond, the scrape of footsteps echoed from within the study. Her pulse leapt. Grace shoved her against the wall, her whisper urgent. Stay hidden. If he finds you here, it's over for both of us. Naomi pressed into the shadow of the hallway, her breath shallow, her body trembling. The linens lay scattered like silent witnesses across the floor, betraying her presence. The brass handle of the study door turned slowly. The creak of polished wood filled the hall as James Whitmore's tall frame emerged, his cold eyes sweeping the corridor. His gaze lingered on the linens. And in that suspended moment, Naomi felt her heart pound so violently it seemed the whole mansion could hear it. James's eyes lingered on the scattered linens in the hall, his expression sharp and unreadable. The air in the corridor thickened, and Naomi pressed herself into the shadows, willing herself to disappear. For 2 years she had mastered the art of invisibility in this mansion, but never had it been tested like this. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward quickly, her voice soft, carefully controlled. I dropped them earlier. I was going to ask Naomi to replace them, but she must have already gone back downstairs. James's gaze shifted from the linens to his wife. His lips curled into the faintest smirk, one Naomi had seen before, the smirk of a man who enjoyed watching others squirm. "Clumsy, Grace," he murmured, his voice low and laced with disdain. "You've always been clumsy when you're nervous." Naomi's pulse thudded in her ears. Mrs. Whitmore's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, but Naomi could see the tremor in her fingers from where she hid. She prayed James wouldn't step further into the hall. After what felt like an eternity, he gave a dismissive wave and turned away, strolling down the staircase toward the main hall. His footsteps echoed like a judge's gavel in Naomi's chest. Only when the sound of his shoes faded did Naomi finally let out the breath she had been holding. Her body sagged against the wall, her palms slick with sweat. Mrs. Whitmore turned to her immediately, grabbing her by the shoulders. "We don't have much time," she whispered fiercely. "You heard what he said. You understand now." Naomi swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I understand that your husband is dangerous. But ma'am," her voice faltered. "What can I do? I'm just the maid. I'm nobody to him." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes glistened with desperation. "That's exactly why you can help me. He doesn't see you, Naomi. He never has. He thinks you're invisible. That makes you the only person who can move freely in this house without suspicion. He'll never imagine you could be the one standing between him and his plan." Naomi's mind reeled. She thought of the years she had spent scrubbing floors, polishing silver, laundering linens, always overlooked, always treated as part of the furniture. She thought of her childhood in Baltimore, of the nights she slept in shelters after her mother died, of the jobs where she was underpaid and overworked until she was little more than a shadow. She had survived by being unseen. And now Mrs. Whitmore was asking her to use that invisibility as a weapon. Her voice trembled. "If we do this, if we try to stop him, he'll destroy us both. Men like him, they always win." Mrs. Whitmore's grip tightened. "Not this time. I won't survive this without you, Naomi. Please." Naomi looked into her employer's pleading blue eyes, and something hardened within her. She thought of every time James had barked her name across the dining hall as if summoning a dog, every time he had sneered when she served him, every time he had looked through her as if she didn't exist. Perhaps that was his mistake. Perhaps invisibility wasn't a weakness, it was the sharpest blade she had. Naomi straightened her shoulders. "Then we'll need proof. Not just words we've overheard. Evidence that no lawyer, no judge, no jury can twist." Mrs. Whitmore blinked, startled by the sudden steel in her tone. You've done this before." Naomi nodded slowly. "When you grow up the way I did, you learn how to survive. I've seen powerful men fall because they thought no one was watching. I've learned to watch. I've learned to listen. And I've learned to keep records." Mrs. Whitmore's breath hitched, but she nodded. "Then tell me what we do." Naomi's voice dropped to a whisper. "First, we act as if nothing has changed. He cannot suspect a thing. Second, I'll start recording. His words, his actions, anything that ties him to what we just heard. Third," she hesitated, then added, "we prepare for the moment he tries to act. Because he will." The enormity of what she was suggesting settled heavily between them, but Mrs. Whitmore nodded, her fear mingled now with the faintest spark of hope. That night, as Naomi moved about the kitchen preparing dinner, her heart pounded with every step. She slid a small recording device into the apron pocket of her uniform. She placed Mrs. Whitmore's phone strategically near the dining room, the microphone aimed toward where James always sat. Every word would be captured. James arrived for dinner in a crisp tailored suit, his arrogance radiating with every gesture. He poured wine for himself and for his wife, watching her closely as she lifted the glass. Naomi's breath caught as Mrs. Whitmore brought the rim to her lips. She saw the faint flicker of hesitation in her employer's eyes. Grace glanced at her husband, then at Naomi in the kitchen doorway before taking a small sip. James's smirk deepened. "Good girl," he murmured. Naomi clenched the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. She had switched the bottles earlier, just as she had promised herself she would. Whatever James thought he had laced into that wine now sat harmlessly down the drain. Mrs. Whitmore would live tonight. But James didn't know that. Hours later, when Mrs. Whitmore pretended to grow drowsy and retreated upstairs, James lingered in the living room with his phone. Naomi, moving silently through the hall, pressed herself against the doorframe of his study, recording every word as he whispered into the receiver. "It's done," James said coldly. "She drank it all. By morning it'll look like natural causes. The doctor's ready to sign the certificate. We'll move the assets within the week." Naomi's stomach twisted, but her hand remained steady as she held the phone. Every syllable was another weapon she would use against him. When James ended the call, he leaned back in his chair, humming softly to himself, oblivious to the maid standing in the shadows, collecting the evidence that would unravel his empire. Naomi retreated quietly to the kitchen, her legs trembling, but her resolve firmer than ever. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting back. And yet, even as she prepared the next step of their plan, a chill ran down her spine. Because James Whitmore wasn't stupid. He was cruel, cunning, and ruthless. And sooner or later he would sense the shift in the air. The question was, would Naomi be ready when he did? The creak of the back door startled her. She turned quickly, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the night, was a man she had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden by the brim of his hat. "Mr. Whitmore sent me," he said, his voice deep and calm. "He said the maid should be expecting me." Naomi froze, her blood running cold. Naomi's breath caught as the tall stranger stepped fully into the kitchen, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his face. His presence filled the room, silent but heavy, like a storm cloud before the lightning. "Mr. Whitmore sent me," he repeated, his tone even, as if he were delivering nothing more sinister than a message. But the stillness in his voice told Naomi there was no harmless purpose behind his visit. Men like James did not send emissaries for errands. They sent them to clean up problems. Naomi steadied her hands on the counter, willing herself not to tremble. She had survived this long by hiding fear, by wearing a mask of obedience. Now was no different. "Yes, sir," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "I was told you'd be coming." The man's head tilted slightly, studying her. Naomi kept her posture composed, but every muscle in her body was taut with readiness. If she ran, he would chase her. If she broke, he would sense it. The only path forward was to keep him believing she was exactly what she appeared to be. The maid, small, compliant, forgettable. "Good," the man said after a pause. "We'll keep this simple. Where's the wine he gave her tonight?" Naomi felt her pulse quicken, but she bowed her head slightly, masking it with deference. "It's in the bin outside, sir. I can show you." For a moment, silence hung in the room, thick as tar. Finally the man gave a single nod. "Go on then. Lead the way." Naomi moved carefully, her steps slow but deliberate. She led him through the dim back corridor and out into the cool night air. The garden stretched wide, manicured hedges glowing faintly under the moonlight. At the edge of the stone path the refuse bins waited. She lifted the lid of the nearest one, praying her hand would not betray its shaking. "There," she whispered. The man leaned forward, peering inside. Naomi's mind raced. She had poured the poison wine down the drain earlier, rinsing the bottle clean before discarding it. There was nothing inside but scraps of food and empty paper. Still he reached in, rustling through the contents. "You emptied it," he said finally, his voice low but certain. Naomi's heart skipped. She forced herself to remain calm. "Yes, sir. It's my duty to tidy after dinner. Mr. Whitmore doesn't like to see mess in his house." The man studied her again, his eyes sharp, searching for cracks in her mask. Naomi met his gaze briefly, just enough to appear honest before lowering her eyes once more. The role of the invisible servant was second nature to her. Tonight it might save her life. After a long moment, the man straightened. "Fine," he said. "He'll want a report. Don't say a word to anyone. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Naomi whispered. He gave her one last look, then turned and disappeared into the night, his footsteps fading into the distance. Naomi stood frozen until the sound was gone, her lungs burning from the breath she had held. She knew now beyond any doubt that James's reach was vast. He had men who moved in silence, who obeyed without question. He had doctors ready to falsify records, allies prepared to erase evidence. He had built his empire not just on wealth, but on fear and loyalty bought with blood. And yet, Naomi also knew he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated her. The following days blurred into a tense rhythm of deception and preparation. Naomi worked as she always had, polishing silver until it gleamed, folding linens with practiced precision, answering James's summons with quiet obedience. But beneath the surface she was gathering threads, weaving a net that would one day tighten around him. The recordings grew longer with each passing night. James whispered into phones, scribbled notes into ledgers, handed envelopes to men in dark coats. Naomi captured it all, slipping recorders under tables, planting Mrs. Whitmore's phone where it could catch his words, memorizing names and times until they burned into her memory. And Grace, no Mrs. Whitmore, played her part with quiet desperation. She smiled at dinners, sipped her wine without flinching, laughed at her husband's cruel jokes as if they were harmless. Behind closed doors, though, she pressed Naomi's hands in hers and whispered, "Is it enough? Will this be enough to bring him down?" Naomi never answered directly. Because she knew what Mrs. Whitmore did not. Men like James did not fall easily. They clawed and fought and dragged others down with them. But Naomi also knew something else. She was not afraid anymore. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening, when the mansion was filled with the hum of an intimate gathering. James had invited a handful of associates, men in sharp suits with watchful eyes and brittle smiles. Naomi moved silently among them, refilling glasses, clearing plates, listening. In the study, as laughter and clinking glasses filled the hall outside, James lowered his voice to a man seated across from him. Naomi lingered near the doorway, feather duster in hand, her recorder tucked in her apron. "It's all set," James said smoothly. "Her assets will transfer as soon as the death certificate is filed. You'll receive your share when the funds move offshore. No one will question it. A tragic accident, a grieving husband, who would suspect?" Naomi's stomach tightened, but she kept her movements steady, dusting the shelves as if she were deaf to his words. The recorder caught every syllable. Then the stranger returned. The same man from the night of the wine bottle. He stepped into the study without knocking, his eyes flicking briefly toward Naomi before settling on James. "There's a problem," he said quietly. James's brow furrowed. "What kind of problem?" "The maid," the man replied. Naomi's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm, to keep dusting the shelves. "What about her?" James asked, his tone sharp. "She's too observant. Too precise. I don't like it." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Naomi's hand froze mid-motion, gripping the duster. James chuckled softly, the sound low and cruel. "Naomi?" he said, his voice carrying across the room like a knife. "She's nothing. She's been invisible her whole life. That's why she's useful. Furniture doesn't speak. Furniture doesn't think. She's exactly where she belongs." Naomi's jaw clenched, but she didn't look up. She couldn't afford to. The stranger hesitated, but finally nodded. James poured himself another drink, dismissing the concern with a flick of his hand. And Naomi knew then, the time had come. That night, when the guests had gone and the mansion lay in silence, Naomi moved quickly. She gathered the recordings, the notes, the hidden files she had copied onto a small flash drive. She tucked them into the lining of her uniform, securing them close to her skin. Then, with trembling hands, she slipped away from the servants' quarters and out into the night. She walked for miles, the weight of the evidence pressing against her heart, until she reached a payphone on the edge of the city. Her voice was steady when she made the call. "This is an anonymous tip," she said. "I have proof of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy by James Whitmore. Send someone you trust. No one else." When the line clicked dead, Naomi felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in years she was not hiding. She was fighting. The raid came 3 nights later. Sirens split the night, red and blue lights slicing through the darkness as federal agents stormed the Whitmore estate. Naomi watched from the shadows of the garden as men in suits flooded the halls, their voices commanding, their hands gripping warrants. James roared in protest, his arrogance unraveling into fury as agents pulled ledgers from his desk, files from his cabinets, devices from his study. He demanded answers, threatened lawsuits, cursed them all, but the evidence was undeniable. And when Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice clear, and handed them the recordings Naomi had collected, the last thread of his control snapped. James Whitmore was taken away in handcuffs that night, his empire collapsing behind him. The stranger who had haunted Naomi's nights was let out in silence, his eyes dark with unspoken rage. Naomi stood at the edge of the lawn, her apron still on, her hair pulled neatly back. To the world, she was still the maid, unnoticed and unimportant. But she knew the truth, she had brought down a monster. In the weeks that followed, the story spread across headlines. Billionaire arrested in shocking murder plot. Whitmore empire crumbles under federal investigation. Testimony of domestic worker key to case. For once, Naomi's name was spoken not as a command barked across a dining hall, but as a symbol of courage. She had not just survived, she had fought back. And though life after the mansion was uncertain, Naomi carried something she had never known before: the weight of dignity, the power of her own voice. When you hear stories like this, it reminds us of something we often forget. Injustice hides in plain sight, and sometimes the most overlooked people are the ones who hold the power to expose it. Naomi was just a maid, invisible in the eyes of the powerful, but in the end, her invisibility became her greatest strength. If you believe stories like Naomi's deserve to be told, stories that shine a light on the abuse of power, on the resilience of those who refuse to be silenced, then don't let this story end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next story. And if you stand with Naomi, if you believe in justice even when it seems impossible, then like this video and let us know in the comments what justice means to you. Because every time we share, every time we speak, we make it harder for the powerful to hide.